See, first thing is you've got to understand that all suffering is only a story. Its story is what is causing the suffering. So, but merely understanding it's a story is not sufficient. You must know what is the story. So you must stay with the suffering. That's the next stage. When you stay with the suffering will tell you its own story, which would be very surprising to you. You would not have expected that. For example, many years ago, I knew of a young man who was studying at IIT. He later on became a very big scientist. IIT, as you all know, has the cream of India. So, but while doing his physics there, he developed a tremendous amount of lust. So he began to do yoga. Lust would not go. Then he began to do many other things, but lust would not come under control. So this was the condition in which he was. So whatever he was trying, he could not control this lust, and that was affecting his academics. That was his suffering. So when he was made to experience that suffering, first by making him stay with it, what happened was the story came out. The story was, this person hated experimental physics. He was all in love with theoretical physics, but he was dead against experimental physics. He just had no inclination. He had love for mathematics and all the abstract concepts of physics. That was his fascination. And he would not like to waste his time on experimental physics. This dislike amounting to hatred for experimental physics manifested as lust. Whenever you are involved in some work which you do not like, which you hate, then lust becomes too much. Because then you are doing it for survival's sake, and you always have a fear of survival, because he knew that he might fail in experimental physics, which means he will fail in his MSc, which means he may not become the scientist that he wants to be, which means his survival is at stake. His whole survival is in becoming a great scientist. That was shaken. So when survival is threatened, lust would automatically go up. They have a close link. Lust and survival and security are closely linked. When that is threatened, it will automatically go up. Suppose you are playing in the share market and your shares are coming down, you will see your lust is going up. Suppose you engage in business and your business is failing, your lust will go up. Always failure, which leads to a threat of survival, lust would automatically go up. So this became very, very clear to him. And then he had the courage to stay with the suffering and then also experience it. So it began to reveal itself, the story. And then he knew, oh, this is it, is it? So what happened? He suddenly developed a love for experimental physics, because he knew that this lust was connected with this dislike for experimental physics. He said, okay, I'll put a little more effort. And then he did that, and the lust disappeared. It came down to normal proportions. And of course, later on, he became a world-famous scientist also. So the story gets revealed. That's why we talk in terms of created problem and real problem. So whenever you tell us, this is our problem, we know that it is a created problem. The real problem is something else. So how to get there? Stay with it. First, understand everything is only a story. Because in reality, there can be no suffering. Because when you experience reality as it is, there's only joy, there's only bliss, there's only love, no matter what it is. But you do not experience reality because your mind is all the time interfering. And what is the mind? It is all the time judging, it is commenting. Why? Mind is nothing but the flow of thought. And what is thought? Thought is measurement. It compares yesterday with today, today with tomorrow, him with somebody else. All the time it's comparing, it is measurement. Thought is an instrument to measure, constantly measuring it is. So when you are measuring, suppose there is this vase, you must look at this vase, not be measuring it in terms of its color or size or shape. But this the mind is nothing but the flow of thought, and thought is from the past. And past is memory, and memory is dead. So death is flowing through you. And if you truly die to the past and to the future, psychologically if you would die to them, then you would live in the present. And there's great joy and bliss there. That's what we're trying to do to you. So now what happens is, if you're going to stay with suffering, mostly the story will be revealed. If that also does not reveal, then you can move into experiencing suffering, when the story will definitely be revealed. And not only that, there could be a charge. Now the staying with may give you the story, but it might not remove the charge. Now in this boy's case, what happened was, in the staying with, he came to know this story. Okay, I am hating experimental physics and all these things. But that was not the end of the story. Still there was that discomfort. So as he began to experience suffering, it became very clear to him that there was a remark by an uncle of his who was a big professor of physics in an American university, who, as a small boy, made a comment, only fools would do experimental physics. The greater your brains, you would move into theoretical physics. So there started the bias against experimental physics. So there was such a dislike for it. So he experienced that suffering there, and the charge went away. So to remove the charge, you have got to experience suffering. Whenever anything is re-experienced, the charge goes away. Fully you must re-experience it. Like two people cannot stay on the same spot, isn't it? You have to knock down one and put the other in. So in a similar way, what happens is, when you re-experience it, that charge is removed. It's gone. And with the charge gone, entire perception changes. Because it comes from your story or it comes from the charge, the perception. Once perception is changed, everything changes. Because your experiencing of reality depends on your perception. If that changes, the experience changes. And then the suffering is gone. But the ultimate suffering is, there should be no perception at all. So this is at the first level. This is like normal suffering. But if you want to go to a level where you will experience things as they are, then thought itself must stop. And that is possible. When you are drinking coffee, you must be drinking coffee. Why should you think about the cricket commentary there or the score? It should be on drinking the coffee. That's when completely all suffering ends. There's nothing but joy and love in your life. What joy? Unconditional joy and unconditional love. You could be a beggar. You could be a leper. But you will have unconditional joy. This joy does not depend upon whatever you are gaining or whatever you are losing. It is just there. You could be anybody. You might be the world's most powerful man, the world's most richest man, but you will not have this joy unless you experience reality as it is. And unconditional love. There will be love towards the king as well as the beggar, because there is no thought. So all this is possible to achieve.